Good morning, Excellency, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to virtual EU Ambassador Lecture with His Excellency Denis Chaibi, the Ambassador of the European Union to Indonesia. I hope everyone is doing well and in good spirits. I'm Afni and I will be the MC. Today we have the privilege of hosting Ambassador Denis. Welcome, Ambassador. Ladies
Hello,
and
hello,
gentlemen. Yes, how are you, Ambassador?
hello.
Great, yes. Ladies and gentlemen, today's lecture offers a closer look at how the EU is responding to the global trade challenges through recent agreements, strategic partnership, and supports for the WTO's rules-based framework. But before we proceed, I would like to acknowledge the participation of our university chapters from across Indonesia and extend a warm welcome to all the students joining us via Zoom. We are pleased to have students turning in from different cities such as Palembang, Surabaya, Yogyakarta, Purwokerto, Medan, Samarinda, Makassar, Jayapura, and many others. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Remember to share your insight and highlights from today's event on social media by tagging us at FPC Indo and at uni_Eropa. Now let's kick off today's discussion. I would like to introduce you with our moderator for today, Dr. Handus Muhadi Sugiono. He is a lecturer of international relations at Universitas Gadjah Mada. Without further ado, Pak Muhadi, I would like to hand over the microphone to you, Pak.
Thank you very much, Afni. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Ambassador Chaibi. Nice to see you again. Hope you are well. So today there are a lot of discussion about international rule-based order. It is a framework of political, legal, economic rules established especially after the Second World War. It reflects the commitments of states to work on principles, rules, and institutions, and not simply on power. Now, this rule-based order has been very much under threat, under challenge, not least also in the connection to international trade. And in this case, the European Union is not only a strong proponent of the rule-based order, but also a self-proclaimed defender of such order. Now, this task is, of course, not getting easier, given the fact that under current multipolar world, the challenge comes not only from smaller countries, but also from rising power, as well as from powerful countries like the US. Now, it is a great honor for us today to have Ambassador Denis Chaibi to speak about the role of the European Union in defending this kind of rule-based trade order. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Ambassador Denis.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sugiono. It's a pleasure to see you again. I propose to just go through this presentation for about 20 to 30 minutes and then do a Q&A.
Yes.
And I would start with what you've said, Dr. Sugiono. You said that the EU is a self-proclaimed defender. And I know that often in Indonesia, people are a bit fed up with the EU being a self-proclaimed something, and they want to see action. So today, what I want to do through the presentation is to show how our actions actually defend the rule-based order, in particular in the trade area. So it's all about actions, facts, rather than self-entitlement or claims. So let me start with the first slide as EU as a global trade and investment powerhouse. And make very quickly 5 points. If we can go to the next slide. Okay. If you want me to move the slide, just let me know and I will do. So yes, if one mentions trade, often the first reaction will be to say, "Oh, the first trade power is China or US," and it depends obviously how you count, how you measure it. And it's true that if you take just exports or just goods, you will have a different results. But if you take goods and services, export and imports, all that together, then you will realize that the EU is the largest trading bloc globally. And it is also the top foreign investor. So this is often ignored or misconstrued. But when you take goods, services, and investment, we are the biggest trade powerhouse in the world. But what is very important, and that's my second point, it's not a one-way street. It's not that we just export or invest. It's a two-way street. We are one of the most open economies. People often criticize our standards and regulation as hinder to trade, but we have a 45% trade to GDP ratio, and that's with the rest of the world. If you take also the trade that is within the EU, we are above 100%. So we are truly open, but it's true, we have standards. And in order to export to the EU market, you need to reach certain standards. But when you reach standards, you are also very competitive. So, but just to give you a comparison, our trade to GDP ratio with the rest of the world is 45%. In the US, it's only 25%. So this gives you an idea of the magnitude of our openness of economy. And not only are we in ourselves very open to trade, the fact that we have so many trade agreements is also a kind of liberalization of trade on a global scale. So China has a lot of agreements, and China is the number one trading for 71 countries, but we are the number one for trading with 72 countries. So we are the biggest customer of 72 countries. Once again, if you compare to the US, US is only the first customer for 28 countries. So it shows that we are open and totally a defender of international trade with 76 FTAs in place. And then my final point is about investment. We are both an active investor abroad, but we also receive a lot of investment in the EU. So we receive about a quarter of total investment available in the world. So it really truly shows how important for us trade is and how important investment is. And again, as a two-way street, in and out. Let's move to the next slide. Why are we so dependent on trade and why are we defending it? Because that's how the single market operates. The way the 27 member states of the EU are working together is based on a very integrated trade model, which rests on four freedoms: the freedom of movement for goods, the freedom of movement for services, for capital, and for people. So basically, this has allowed the EU to thrive economically. You know, after the Second World War, the state of our economy was really not brilliant. And thanks to the single market and the way the different member states of the EU have traded together, we have managed to increase our economic welfare significantly. We now represent a sixth of the world's economy. We have a market of roughly 450 million people and 23 million businesses. So it has been a fantastic economic growth story, not only for the original members of the EU, but if you take the more recent members, those who joined, for example, in 2004, you will have to carefully look at their GDP and the growth of their GDP over the last 20 years. And while it's perhaps not in the headlines, you have to realize that it is very, very difficult to get over the middle income trap. So the middle income trap is you reach a certain level of GDP per capita, let's say 10,000 GDP, 10,000 euro of GDP per capita, and then it's very hard to grow above that, because to go above that, you need to go into very high added value products, be it goods or services. And to reach there, you need to have a lot of structural reforms on education, on governance, on administrative compliance. And that's why it's a very, very difficult threshold to pass. Some countries have managed very well, such as South Korea. China is doing it. But if you look at overall the number of countries in the world, those who have achieved that without natural resources, because obviously if you have a lot of petrol or gas, you can manage, but without significant natural resources, it is very difficult. There are really not many countries around the world who have done that. And we, thanks to trade and integration of trade, we have managed to go over the middle income trap. Next slide, please. And because it has worked so well within the EU, we have made a point of expanding the EU global trade network. So we have really an approach that is global. It is with clearly defined objectives and flexible. So we made it tailor-made. We don't have only FTAs. We have also other type of trade agreement or trade concessions. So we have GSP or even GSP plus, which are unilateral concessions for countries that are under a certain level of GDP per capita. We have also other forms of trade engagement with digital trade engagement, sustainable investment facilitation agreements. So we are looking at different type of engagement, but with always the goal of favoring trade. But obviously, and it is a very vivid subject in Indonesia, sustainable trade has become one of our key objectives. And the word sustainable is sometimes perceived as protectionist, but it's exactly the opposite. If you want your trade to continue, you have to make it sustainable. So this is why it's such a very high objective. Is it successful? Well, as I said, we have 76 agreements existing. And more recently, we've had Mercosur, Mexico, Switzerland, and we are moving with other countries, India, Thailand, Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia, as you know. So it is working pretty well. Our trade teams are very active. And it is really leading to a global approach on trade, where even if some powers are retracting from trade, we are continuing the global trade integration with the interested partners. Next slide. So let me start by illustrating what I've said with the Mercosur FTA. So the first very important thing to flag is that the EU-Mercosur FTA has been signed, but not yet agreed by the member states. So at the moment, it is an attempt by the executive arm of the EU, the European Commission, to move this project forward. But the ultimate decision is for the member states through the Council and the European Parliament. So those two bodies will have to vote, and I think that it will be put to a vote relatively soon, in a month or two, and it will be crucial to see how the vote goes. The objective of this free trade is obviously, the big picture thing is when a major power located on the same continent as Brazil retracts from trade, if the South American bloc can accept closer trade relations with the EU, it is obviously a fundamental action to preserve the rule-based order. So beyond the economic interest that is direct for the exporters, the importers, the key thing is to really make sure that international trade remains vibrant. So obviously, we want to boost bilateral trade, establish stronger trade rules, and advance shared values. But what we want is really a comprehensive framework for cooperation with South America. Obviously, it is quite significant in terms of volume, more than 100 billion euro of bilateral goods trades, and a lot of investment, 385 billion. So it is one of these mega deal that can have a huge impact on both the countries of Mercosur and the member states of the EU. But as I said, the key thing is that it has not been yet approved by the member states and the European Parliament, and that will be the most interesting development coming soon. The next slide, a different type of agreement, the one with Vietnam. Vietnam has been agreed by the member states and the parliament and already entered into force almost 5 years ago. And the impact of the Vietnam FTA with the EU has been tremendous. As you can see, Vietnam exports to the EU increased by more than 60%. And it's not only that, and it's not only the incredible surplus, trade surplus that Vietnam has accumulated with the EU. What is very important to realize, and it's not on the slide, is the fact that also by adopting EU standards, the Vietnamese economy has become very competitive, and it has increased even more its exports to the US. And as you've seen, the US had mooted a very significant tariff for Vietnam. Why? Because Vietnam had a trade surplus that had come over $100 billion with the US. And why? Because their standards were excellent and the economy is very competitive. So that's a fundamental aspect of FTA with the EU. When there's an FTA with the EU, you want to take advantage of the fact that there is no tariffs, but you still need to be very competitive. But then you focus your industry in becoming competitive for the EU market with high standards. And by becoming competitive for the EU market, you become competitive for many, many other markets. And that's exactly what happened for Vietnam. And the second important element for Vietnam is that the foreign direct investment flows doubled. They are still not immensely significant, but they have improved greatly, and that is a positive story. Next slide. Besides the multilateral trade deal, and we have also Switzerland and Mexico that have not been explained here. What we try to do is upholding multilateral trade rules. And this is very difficult because big trade powers are not really respecting the rules of the game. For example, one state has never fielded a judge in the dispute settlement body, preventing it from working properly. Some people don't respect the rules. So it is very difficult. But for us, for the EU, it's not because others are not respecting the rules that we will stop respecting them. Why? Because the EU is a rule-based organization. Rules are the way the 27 member states work together and survive together. So if we would start to not respect international rules, it would go straight at the heart of our system, and it would be the unraveling of the EU. So that's why we are trying to uphold multilateral trade rules, but we understand that reform is needed. So that's why we are trying to update this rule book, strengthening the monitoring role of the WTO, and overcoming the deadlock of the dispute settlement. So for that, there are numerous talks in Geneva, and more specifically for the deadlock on the WTO dispute settlement, we have set up an alternative body to which a number of countries subscribe to. And this is a positive development, and we hope that Indonesia will be able to subscribe to this alternate body soon. And that leads me to Indonesia and EU-Indonesia trade relations. The next slide. I've put a couple of key words that I will now go into. So first of all, the fact that the trade is growing and rewarding. Obviously, if we go to the next slide, you will see that there are little ups and downs, but the trajectory, the direction of travel is more trade. Can we go to the next slide, please? Obviously, the pandemic year was, and the reaction was an abnormal value, but overall, trade progress, especially if you put goods and services together. You will see that compared to the 10 years ago, the average trend is higher. So that means that the EU is a good customer for Indonesia. As you can see, Indonesia has always a surplus, trade surplus with the EU. The second characteristic, and that's the next slide, is that the trade is complementary. And that's a big difference with Mercosur. On Mercosur, there are some items where we are in direct competition, especially in terms of agricultural products, but not only. But that's often a very sensitive point for the EU. And here we are not competitors. Our economy complement each other. So if you see what is exported by Indonesia to the EU, minerals, so basically it's palm oil, it's chemicals, it can be textile, footwear. So these kind of things are not produced very competitively in the EU, and therefore what we import from Indonesia is very important for our competitiveness, because we integrate palm oil or chemicals or these kind of things into products such as cosmetics, shampoo, cleaning products, and that is very important for us to be competitive in manufacturing that. And then for our consumers, textile, footwear, it's obviously very good to have the best deal possible, or one of the best deals. And obviously, Indonesia proposed such a deal. So we are complementary in terms of products, but we're also complementary in global value chain. That's the next slide. Because the one with a higher value, if you look at the next slide, so what we are able to trade are things that can integrate Indonesia in global value chain. Now, if you want to be a real trading power, it shouldn't be about just one or two products that one export, because that's risky. It's not very resilient. It's not very diversified, and the added value is relatively limited. But when you are integrated in global value chain, that means that many different products come for one stage of added value in your country, then you build up your competitiveness and also the skills level. So that's what we are trying to do, Indonesia and EU, is to really be essential component in global value chain. And that's for goods, but we have also a thriving trade in services. If we go to the next slide, and there the EU is a bit better placed. It exports a bit more services, and it's a lot of businesses services, transport, telecommunications, IT. And again, this brings a lot of skills and competitiveness to Indonesia. So these services bring broader gains, and that's very important for the economic future of both EU and Indonesia. Now, the next slide, if we look a bit more into detail about what the EU provides in terms of inputs, we have, next slide, please. We have next slides. That's the previous one. Next slides. And then next slide. So these are the input from the EU. So you can see that advanced machinery, specialized component, transport equipment, and ICT, these are the things that really enhance Indonesia industrial capability and export capacity. So in other words, what the EU provides is things that can multiply the possibility for Indonesia to export. What we want to do, and that's the next slide, is really focus on diversification and competitiveness. The EU doesn't want to rely just on a couple of customers, on a couple of suppliers. As I said, our approach is a global value chain, and we want to have partners like Indonesia. And for Indonesia, it is a very good position for us, to have access to such a big market with a lot of promises, strong human capital, a lot of natural resources. So there are really good mutual opportunities. And what we offer in exchange as EU, and that's the next slide, is we are a reliable business partner. Because it takes so long to take regulations and it is still a very legislative environment rather than an executive one, our rules are very clear, predictable. Sometimes we get a lot of criticism in Indonesia about our rules, but at the end, our rules are very transparent. And if there are problems, we have dispute settlement mechanism that among the fairest in the world. It's less partisan than in other places, and the exporters know it. When perhaps the ease of business is not always the best, but the reliability, the trustworthiness, and the fairness of our jurisdiction is always recognized by our business partners. So, yeah, when everyone is booming and everyone is trading, perhaps we are a bit slow and a bit complicated. But when people stop to trade or make it very difficult or impose a tariff overnight or dump a lot of products, well, then suddenly the fact that we are reliable is a big advantage, and as well as being very transparent. So that's why we are convinced that there is a massive untapped potential for EU-Indonesia trade relations. And if you compare with the rest of ASEAN, and that's the next slide, you will see that Indonesia is only the fifth trading partner of the EU, even though Indonesia represents 36% of GDP, and basically it is Thailand, Philippines, and Vietnam put together. Well, we actually trade more with Vietnam, with Singapore, with Malaysia, and Thailand. So the fact that Indonesia is only the fifth trade partner of the EU in ASEAN shows the magnitude of the potential that we could realize with an EU-Indonesia CEPA. And that's my next slide. And we are coming to the end. That's the former presidents of the EU and of Indonesia discussing the CEPA. And if we take the next slide, we will see that it should increase the welfare GDP by 3.2 billion, which is a massive increase. It should increase Indonesia's export to the EU by 20%, but also favor Indonesia's global export. And perhaps there would be some structural reforms. And we've heard that some rules regarding local content requirement or others would be reformed. That's also part of President Trump's announcement on tariff, but also thanks to some of the discussions around an FTA between EU and Indonesia. So we are very bullish on what the CEPA could bring, but we are also it's also very important to underline what would happen if there's no CEPA, because the EU is continuing its agreement with the other ASEAN countries. So Singapore and Vietnam is already in, and it's moving fast and doing well. You've seen the trade evolution of Vietnam-EU trade. And then Indonesia will lose a preferential tariff status in a year and a half, and therefore it's very important to secure reduced tariffs, or at least the promise of reduced tariff soon, in order to avoid this possibility. So this is in short what the CHEPA, so the Free Trade Agreement, is. There you have a number of cross-cutting issues that are being discussed. It's quite technical. I'm not going to go into it. What I can tell you, and that's the next slide, is that there have been 19 negotiations round over the last 9 years. We have good momentum. Next slide, please. We have good momentum. There have been negotiations and discussions even last week. So we really do hope we can clinch the deal, hopefully this year, so that we can bring more welfare to both Indonesia and EU. Thank you very much. That closes the formal part of the presentation, and now I will be very keen to discuss more items with all of you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Chaibi. It has been quite interesting exposition about the EU views on the rule-based trade order. And I think from the lecture, we can understand how significant the role of the rule-based trade order for the experience of the EU from the very beginning. Following the Second World War, the EU has expanded very significantly, and thanks to the establishment of a rule-based trade order. And that is why the EU has been very confident that this rule-based trade order can also benefit other countries as well. And therefore, EU is also trying to promote as defend such kind of order because of the benefit that EU has enjoyed, and believe that this can be enjoyed also by other countries in the world. And the EU has been very consistent in defending the rule-based order, and now trying to expand its connection, its network with other countries through various trade negotiations, including with Indonesia. So, despite the challenge to the rule-based trade order, the EU is very confident that the world will be expanding and growing together if more and more countries also adhere to the rule-based trade order. So I think there are a lot of hands raised, and I would like to give the opportunity, first of all, to 3 questions. First is from Emmanuel Fadika from the University Kristen Indonesia, and then Halim Abdelaziz from Universitas Diponegoro, and then Iza from Unida Gontor.
Good afternoon for all. First of all, thanks for the session. Thanks to moderator, Mr. Muhadi Sugiono, and
recording in progress.
Mr. Denis Chaibi. Okay, so my question is, what's the benefit for the EU, for the European Union, for trading from Indonesia product to European Union, which is, we know from Orbital, European Union is a big position for the trade position in Indonesia, which is United States and European Union. My question, Orbital, what is the benefit for the European Union if we, Indonesia, get more good relationship on the economic program? That's it from me. Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Halim?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Muhadi and His Excellency, Mr. Denis Chaibi. In my question is, now Indonesia applies a regulation about downstreaming to process raw materials before they are exported. And what is the impact of the regulation of the trade relationship between Indonesia and EU? And what is your comment about this regulation, His Excellency? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Halim. Now, Iza from Unida Kontor.
Okay, Mr. Mohadi, thank you for the time. Before I start question, can you hear my voice, Mr. Mohadi?
Yeah.
Okay. The first is thank you for Mr. Mohadi for the time, and thank you for Mr. Chaibi for insightful and thought-provoking presentations. My question is, in light of the European Union's commitment to defending the rules-based international trade order, I would like to ask, how does the EU respond to concern regarding the influx of highly competitive, low-price goods from China, which in some cases are perceived as putting pressure on domestic industries? And to what extent are such challenges taken into account in the EU's recent trade negotiations? Thank you, Mr. Mohadi and Mr. Chaibi.
Thank you. Ambassador Chaibi, would you mind to respond to this three questions first before we open another ones?
Sure. So the first question by Emmanuel on the interest of the EU to buy products from Indonesia and more generally the CEPA. So there are three, if I simplify a bit, there are three major benefits for the EU. The first benefit is to be competitive. As I said, lots of products exported by Indonesia at this stage can be incorporated in products made in Europe, but they represent one of the big cost center of these products. So if I take an example, cosmetics, we have a huge industry of lipsticks and shampoo and all that. And we need very good and cheap palm oil in that. So if we can import palm oil with a lower tariff, it will make our products more competitive. So that will allow the EU to have more competitive products that are manufactured thanks to the input of Indonesian exports to the EU. So there's a first factor of competitiveness. The second, and that's a bit broader, is if we have a free trade agreement, we have many more incentives to invest in Indonesia, and we are also keen to have investment of Indonesia in the EU. Because if you know that your product's going to be competitive because they pay less tariffs than their competitors, then you are more interested in investing in the country. So there's a really big interest for the EU from the investment point of view. And third, even more general, at a time where some countries decide to retreat from international trade or are using tariffs in a very arbitrary manner, we want to have a coalition, a broad coalition of countries that still believe in trade and are still predictable and reliable. And we feel that if we would have a free trade agreement with Indonesia, this would be conducive to that possibility. The second question by Halim on downstreaming. Yes, downstreaming has been a controversial point for EU-Indonesia relations. The EU initiated an action before the WTO. Why? And I think it's very important to understand where the EU comes from. If one country joins the WTO, that country, and there are many, many countries which are member of the WTO, the World Trade Organization, that country gets the benefit of the most favored nation. So that means that any concession that is given to one country without a free trade agreement, so without this specific exception, but the tariffs are basically standard for all the participants, all the member states of the WTO. So this is what you get when you join. But what you give, what is asked for you in exchange of benefiting from tariffs that are low for all the participants, What is asked is that you commit to trade. You commit to trade and you don't make import bans. So downstreaming starts with an import ban. And because this is against the spirit of the WTO, the EU wanted to send a signal and initiated a case before the WTO, which it won. This was not taken well by Indonesia, especially compared to China. And China decided to not fight downstreaming, but rather to invest a lot in the first phase of downstreaming, which is the smelting of nickel. So the way the nickel comes from a mineral to a sulfate, a product, that has been done very competitively by China. Now, the EU fully understands that trade has to be fair. It has to be sustainable and also fair. And it's only fair that Indonesia gets its fair share of its mineral revenues. Now, how you get to this fair share and what is fair, these are the discussions that are being held at the moment. For EU to be able to invest and buy Indonesian sulfate, nickel sulfate, they need to have a reassurance about where the downstreaming will end. Because if downstreaming starts with
Recording
sulfate
stopped.
and then it's catalyst and then it's battery and then it's the car, then there's not much interest in the EU in trading because every step of the value chain is done by Indonesia. What you want to do is share this value chain and the money that is in value chain. You want to share it in a fair way and get legal reassurances for investment to take place. So that's what we are doing now regarding downstreaming. We are discussing EU, Indonesia on how to make sure that the downstreaming brings benefits to both parties. And then third question, Isa, about the dumping of goods, cheap goods from
Recording
certain
in
countries.
progress.
Yes, this is an issue. The fundamental issue is that there's an overcapacity in certain countries. There's been overinvestment and not enough consumption. And due to this overinvestment, there's overcapacity. And this overcapacity is financed by higher prices at home. And that's called dumping, and it's also illegal according to WTO rules. So how you correct this dumping of goods? You correct it with different measures. There can be anti-dumping, so that requires an investigation. There can be emergency measures in case there is a surge of certain product, but you also negotiate with the countries interested in order to avoid this kind of dumping. The EU has taken action against the dumping of certain products, but it has focused on big items like electric vehicles or steel. But it is an ongoing effort, and every few months we have anti-dumping investigation that tries to counter the effect of overcapacity in certain countries. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I see a question from someone from Aceh.
Recording stopped.
At the Universitas Al-Muslim. The question is, given the potential erosion of Indonesia's export competitiveness due to the loss of GSP status and ASEAN regional trade dynamics, what concrete strategies should Indonesia adopt to maintain and expand export share to the EU? This is the question from the participant on the chat. And then
Recording in progress.
I will give the opportunity to the second question from Faizara Nadila.
Recording stopped.
Faizara, please.
All right. Is there any problem with my audio still?
Yes, it's fine now.
Okay. I would like to say thank you for His Excellency for the insightful information. I am Faizara from Universitas Mustopo. So my question would be, with the US, as we all know, is progressing into protectionist regulations, what is the EU's perspective or prospect regarding this matter in terms of international trade, especially with Indonesia? And what are the things could we expect in the future for Indonesia-EU trade relations? Thank you.
Thank you very much. The third question will give the opportunity to Sarah Siahaan. Sarah?
Okay, hello.
Yeah.
First of all, I would like to say thank you for your insightful presentation and thank you for the time given to me. I feel honored. I am particularly interested in the investment aspect of EU-Indonesia trade relations. In this context, I would like to ask, in what ways does the economic complementarity between the EU and Indonesia create opportunities for bilateral investment? And to what extent does this strengthen the perception of the EU as a stable, reliable source of foreign direct investment in Indonesia? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Three questions for you, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you very much. The first question by Siti Fadila. Which strategy could Indonesia use in the light of the erosion of GSP and ASEAN competitiveness? Well, you know, it's not for me to tell Indonesia what to do. What I can tell you is if it's to take the point of view of a possible European investor. If I'm a European investor and I want to invest in Indonesia, the things I would pay attention to would first be, yes, the completion of CEPA, the FTA agreement, because this would give me legal reassurances about a stable framework to invest, and from my investment, either sell locally to the huge Indonesian market or to export in the region and beyond. So the first element would be the completion of CEPA. But then there would be other things from an investor, a European investor point of view, that I would pay attention. For example, local content requirement. If the local content requirement results in much higher prices, I'm not going to be very competitive in my export market. And I, as a European investor, I would like to have the option to both sell locally, domestic market, but also export. Same goes for import and export license. A more straightforward system with clarity, legal clarity, would be a huge factor for European investors to put money into Indonesia. More generally, I think what countries in Europe, business people want, is to make sure that there's more private sector opportunities in Indonesia, that, it's not all controlled by state-owned companies in a way that is not always competitive, and that correlated to that there would be more market forces, perhaps less control, more market mechanism, and we feel that economically this could bring benefits. But obviously, it is very sensitive. Indonesia has history about the regulation that didn't go well. So it's not for me to say what should be done or should not be done. What I can tell you is what a European investor would look for. And as I said, completion of CEPA, certain reform on the possibility to make investment be fruitful, and then perhaps a bit more private sector and market mechanism. The second question, the kind of impact of US stance on EU-Indonesia trade relations. Obviously, the fact that the US appears as perhaps less reliable than in the past in terms of tariffs and trade measures is very important for Indonesia. Indonesia has two very big trade surplus, so that it sells much more than it imports, and it's with India and with the US, both more important than the EU. So obviously, as the biggest trade surplus, the impact of US tariffs would be significant. Indonesia is negotiating with the US, and it is hoped that they will find a way to mitigate the measures announced in April by President Trump. But we hope that the fact that such a big market for Indonesia and big origin of trade surplus is becoming a bit less safe, we hope that Indonesia will see the reliability and transparency of the EU in a more positive light, and that we will be able to advance faster with our trade negotiations. We feel that there has been renewed momentum since the last year, and we hope to continue. And then the third question of Sarah, the fact that trade is complementary, is it good for foreign direct investment? Yes, it's very good, because that's exactly the biggest incentives for European investors to come, is that they will export from Indonesia or sell domestically in a way that doesn't compete with their own products at home. So that's why complementarity is such an important factor, not only for trade, but also for investment. Investment is just another way of producing trade. It's just that you take a share in the tools producing the added value, the goods or the services that will be exported. So complementarity is essential. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. We give the opportunity for the next participant to raise a question. First to Muhammad Riswandi from University of Jayabaya. Yes, please.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Muhammad Riswandi. I'm from Jayabaya University. Your Excellency, in light of past tariff disputes between the European Union and the United States, particularly concerning steel, aluminum, and digital services, how does the EU seek to foster a more stable and predictable transatlantic trade relationship while defending its strategic economic interests? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. The second opportunity is given to Khairi Randi.
Thank you so much for giving to me. Thank you so much, Your Excellencies. And my question is about addressing the deforestation. And how will CPA tackle this tension between Indonesia's palm oil export and the EU's strict sustainability agenda? And is there any risk of increasing trade disputes or green barriers that hinder Indonesian export despite the CPA's market access promises? That's my question. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Then I give the third opportunity to Muhammad Farhan.
Thank you for the opportunity, dear Mr. Chaibi, EU delegation to Indonesia. Let me introduction myself. I am Farhan. Ask me question: how much will the EU invest in Indonesia, and what area will in focus on area in investment? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Chaibi. Three questions from Riswandi, Randi, and Farhan.
Yeah. So first question, Mohammad Riswandi, if I understand correctly, it's how the EU will defend itself in the face of US measures. Well, the EU has been quite clear in its communication over the last 6 months, and the message has been consistent. We have never escalated the words or the situation. We've always said that we were ready to negotiate and find a win-win situation with the US, but that if the US would take unilateral action that would appear as arbitrary to us, we would retaliate. So we have prepared 2 packages of measures that have been already approved by the member states, so it would be automatic application. If more tariffs would be imposed, there are already serious tariffs imposed on steel and on cars. But if there would be more in an arbitrary manner and quite disproportionate, the EU has packages of measures ready. But as I said, we are not interested in escalation. We are not interested in trade wars. We're interested in negotiations and deals. And that's why we're continuing to discuss. Now President Trump has recently announced that he would postpone the threat of the 50%. And so there will be intense activity over the next month to see if we can find a landing zone in negotiating with the US. But it's clear that the overall trend of the EU, beside negotiating with the US, is obviously diversifying, so looking at different partners, and that's why I've mentioned the FTA with Mercosur, Mexico, Switzerland, and Indonesia, and those in Southeast Asia that we are negotiating. So diversify, focus on our competitiveness, therefore have a bit more market mechanism, and then also develop the single market. Our single market is very robust and resilient, so there's still more economic added value to be derived from it, and that's also one of the things that we are pursuing. The second question on deforestation, I'm not sure I understood. What is CTA?
On the
Randy?
second question,
Yeah, the second question, Randy mentioned CTA. I don't know what CTA is.
hi Randy, would you like to clarify?
It's CEPA.
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 Yeah.
CEPA.
CEPA. Okay, CEPA. So yes, the deforestation and CEPA, and then what is called as green barriers. There are a number of elements which I think are very important for everyone to bear in mind. First of all, the principle of preserving the environment and fight climate change is something that is not only the EU. Indonesia is part of the Paris Agreement and many other countries. And being part of the Paris Agreement means also to make efforts on curbing emissions or making sure that the emissions that exist can be absorbed by the earth. And there Indonesia has a special responsibility because it has one of the big green space that can absorb a lot of emissions. The others are Congo and Brazil. And it's really very impressive to see that last week, Global Forest Watch, which is one of the most serious organizations looking at deforestation, has shown that over the last few years, Indonesia has deforested much less than Brazil, Congo, or Bolivia. So Indonesia is doing well. And this was recognized by the EU, which very recently has announced the benchmarking exercise, so which category of risk some countries were classified in. And Indonesia, as a whole country, not per region, has been classified as standard risk, which is a recognition of the efforts made when the data was available, which was 2020. So we have positive announcements regarding the implementation of the deforestation regulation, but we also understand that the sensitivity of Indonesia is still high, despite the fact that the implementation of the regulation was delayed by 1 year. Sensitivities are still high. And if we would conclude the CEPA, it would be very useful because we would have a platform. We would have a platform to discuss the implementation, and when there are different opinions, for example, on the reliability of maps used to calculate deforestation or what is a definition, we would have a platform that would allow us for better engagement on this very difficult issue. Now, Randy mentioned, characterized the EU as green barriers. And the WTO recognized that a country can have environmental standards for its trade. So you say green barriers, the EU sees it as standards that are good for the environment. And the EU is very committed to do its share for the environment. And if you look at the recent data, you will see that the EU is really on course to reduce its emissions by 50% over the course of the last 30 years. This obviously is not as good as Indonesia, in the sense that Indonesia has lower emissions per capita than the EU. So we still have a lot of work to do, but we want to make sure that our consumption is not conducive to more environmental degradation. And that's a position by the EU citizens. It is legal according to the rule-based order and the WTO, and it is being implemented in a very transparent and reliable manner. So we hope that we can de-dramatize this and focus on making sure that this doesn't interrupt the trade flows. And if we look at the trade surplus for Indonesia and the overall trajectory and direction of travel of trade, we can see that this is not the case. So let's focus on figures, on facts, and on how to make sure that trade continues. And then the third question, how much investment and in which sectors? Well, as I said during the presentation, there's studies that have been made that shows that there would be more investment to the tune of several billion per year, but it's obviously hard to make a accurate prediction. What we can say is that if there's a bit more space for foreign direct investment here, through more space for the private sector, market mechanism, and some reform from local content, import license, then obviously some European companies that are very competitive for pharmaceutical products, some of the most refined electronics, automotives, these would be investments where European companies are likely to be interested. And then there are obviously in services more things to do, perhaps joint ventures in the field of finance or insurance, this kind of things, advertising. We have lots of agencies and companies that would be very keen to have a very good Indonesian partner and move forward in those sectors. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Chaibi, there is a question from Muhammad Taufik Alwi from Tadulako University in eastern part of Indonesia. How and what do you think about the increasingly rapid development of China's economy, and what are the regulations of the European Union for Indonesia? And what is the impact on Indonesia with the EU cooperation, and are there any risks? So this is the question on the chat. And then the second question is from, I would like to call Putra Prayoga from UNSRI, Universitas Sriwijaya.
All right. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Putra, and I'm from Sriwijaya University. Given that the EU-Indonesian CEPA negotiation have been ongoing and are considered strategically important for both parties, especially in the context of shifting global trade dynamics and the urgent needs for economic diversification, my question is, as you said earlier in the previous answer, beyond the European Union Deforestation Regulation or EUDR, which has raised concern regarding the export of key Indonesian agricultural commodities, what are the main bottlenecks or any other obstacles that have delayed the finalization of the CEPA? Additionally, can you give a comment regarding how optimistic is the EU about concluding the agreement in the near future? Thank you, Mr. Chaibi.
Thank you very much, Putra. And I would like to read one more question from the participant. From Mika Angelia from Universitas Kristen Indonesia. Given Indonesia's rationale to prioritize downstream industrial development and resource sovereignty, how does the EU reconcile its WTO challenge with the broader goals of sustainable and equitable global trade? You have touched upon this issue a little bit earlier. Probably we can expand a little bit more with this question. Ambassador Denis Chaibi.
Okay, thank you. So the first question, Taufik, Chinese economy regulations. Yeah, well, I think that obviously when there are circumventions, so circumvention is when a country that dumps product use a third country to continue dumping product to try to hide the dumping. So that's called circumvention. So basically, Chinese dumps product in Europe. Europe reacts with an anti-dumping regulation and additional tariffs. So China starts to export via Vietnam, for example, where they do transshipment. So it's a Chinese product, but that is brought by, let's say, truck or boat to Vietnam, and then they're transshipped and portrayed as Vietnam produced products, so that the tariffs is different. So circumvention. So the EU has some investigations about circumvention. Circumvention by China through Vietnam or through Indonesia. But that's not it's not the focus of our CEPA negotiations or discussions with Indonesia, which is very different from what the US says to Vietnam and Indonesia, where transshipment and circumvention is a big, very important motivation for the US. So while we recognize that there's an issue, it is not the main aim of our discussions. But there's more than that. It's what the EU wants through a free trade agreement is a preference. It's a preferential agreement. That's the essence of a FTA. It has to be a preference. That's to be compatible with the WTO. That's the way you eschew the MFN, the most favored nation, is by having a preference in a free trade agreement. And there, obviously, we have to. It's a comparative game. Canada has a free trade agreement with Indonesia, so they've had some preferences. Australia has had also some preferences, and these are not the same, and they are constructed differently. So we don't know what is the position of others, but what is important for compared to any other actors is to have a preference. So that's the core essence of our discussion. The second question, the main bottlenecks in CEPA. It's interesting that you mentioned the EUDR. Even though the CEPA would allow for a platform of engagement on EU deforestation regulation implementation, the EUDR is not a formal part of the CEPA, and in principle, it shouldn't be a bottleneck. But perhaps, yes, as you said, it is perhaps a bottleneck because it's so sensitive that it has prevented some negotiators to move forward. But as far as the EU is concerned, the things that are crucial is really that are remaining is precisely the things I've mentioned as an interest for European investors. It is about local content requirement, import license, export license, and downstreaming to see where the downstreaming stops and to have some legal reassurances. So these are the issues that are still being discussed. But since Indonesia wants to reform some of these and that these measures would be conducive to foreign direct investment, yes, I'm optimistic. We can move forward in the negotiations in a quite fast manner. So yes, very positive about the momentum in the negotiations. And then the third question, how we make sure that EU wish for sustainable trade is also compatible with equitable trade. And yes, I hear the criticism, again, same as before, that the EU standards are green barriers and we are preventing Indonesia from getting all the economic growth it deserves thanks to its natural resources. Let me just take an example. Rainforest and tropical forest are essential for biodiversity. They contain more biodiversity than other types of forests, so they're essential for everyone. But the big advantage of biodiversity is that there's a diversification of organisms which means that it builds up the possibility for nature to resist diseases and problems linked to evolution. So if now there is a massive deforestation without any safeguards, and we destroy a lot of biodiversity, we make nature far less resistant and resilient in the face of illnesses, diseases, crops, problems. My point is, without working together for the environment, at some stage it will be, you know, some of the crops, some of the natural resources will be contaminated, and then we won't have enough defenses to preserve, and then there's no trade. If we want to make the trade sustainable, truly sustainable, if we want to make this as a good economic growth, we have to believe in fact-based science on calculations and on measures. And the EU is doing it. Perhaps some people don't like it or misconstrue it, but one has to reflect about the alternatives. The alternative is you know, temperatures rising to the point where lots of crops can no longer survive, or the yield is much lower. So that's why we really want to have a science-based approach and make our trade truly sustainable. And that's, we feel, the way to be equitable. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Denis. I'm sure that there are still a lot of questions that will be raised, but given the limitation of the time, then we cannot no longer give the opportunity to the participant to raise questions. But please allow me to keep the privilege as a moderator to ask you a question. In the literature, the establishment of the liberal trade order was supported by the US at that time. Now, the fact that the US is no longer playing that role, and the EU is now stepping in to lead maintaining the global trade order, will the EU replace the US in maintaining and in leading the global trade order?
A very ambitious question, very strong question. So first of all, yes, the US created the liberal order and made massive unilateral concessions upon forming what was before the WTO, the GATT, and accepting the most favored nation principle. So, and above all, the US was the force that created the international institutions that are responsible for the rule-based order, starting with the UN. So I fully agree that you know, US has to be given a lot of credit for building a zone of. It has not been perfect peace for sure, but it has been a very strong, growing stability of the world. If you compare the post World War II world with the pre World War II. If you take 80 years, the 80 years before the World War II, you had massive wars all around the globe, and after World War II, you had things like decolonization, which obviously sometimes was violent, and we know it in Indonesia, but overall, if you compare to the scale of destruction of the 80 years before, the fact that you had a massive change in, you know, the maps, the countries, the things, with far less death than the World War I, World War II, and other conflict, is an achievement that can be credited partly to the US. So it has been a huge progress. And the EU is very much interested in continuing this progress and defending the rules-based order. we are not as well equipped as the US is. The US is still a much richer country. At some stage, we were getting closer, but over the last 10 years, we have lagged behind a bit. We are not as rich. And above all, we don't have the military power that the US is. And if one cannot enforce the rules and be the ultimate guarantor of peace, it's much harder to preserve the rules-based order. But having said that, the EU has decided to beef up its defense capacities, has decided to be more autonomous in its military capability, and this could assure an era where the EU cannot replace the US, but can do a better share of its work in making the world more secure. We are stepping up in terms of security cooperation around the world. We have, for example, very fruitful conversations with Indonesia on counterterrorism, and there it's not us supplying security to Indonesia, it's us learning from Indonesia, because Indonesia is doing a fantastic job in addressing possible radicalization and how to combat this through civil society. So we are learning a lot. So we are also, developing our skills with lots of different partners. But we have to do far more if we want to be able to defend the rules-based order the way the US did it after World War II. But it is our ambition, and we are working on it and giving us the means. It means also taking bolder position. So, for example, we are having much more difficult conversations with Israel on Gaza because of what's happening there. But we are also arming ourselves to be able to protect Ukraine in the future, because we can see that the relentless attacks by Russia are not stopping. That's how I would close on this very good questions, Dr. Muhadi. And if there are no more questions, I would like to thank all the students for their challenging questions and for having tuned in, and to thank FPCI for this great lecture.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Chaibi. Of course, there are still a lot of hands raised to ask questions, but again, given the limitation of time, then we cannot any longer provide the opportunity to raise the question. But I am sure that all the students and the participants know very well the website of the EU delegation and can send directly the message and question to the EU through this website. Okay, thank you very much once again for insightful presentation, and hope to see you again in the near future. Thank you. I'll give the time back to the MC.
Thank you so much, Pak, for your thoughtful moderation, and also Ambassador Denis for your insightful lecture today. We have learned a lot, I'm sure. Before we close the session, may I invite everyone to take a group picture with Ambassador Denis and Pak Muhadi? Can somebody from the Secretariat give a cue?
One.
Okay. So everybody, can you please turn on your camera? 1, 2, 3. Please give your best smile once again. 1, 2, 3. One last time. 1, 2, 3. Freestyle. All right. That concludes our lecture today. Once again, thank you so much, Ambassador Denis, Pak Muhadi, and all of the participants for your active participation today. Before you leave the room, please don't forget to fill in the attendance form in the chat box to claim your certificate, and see you in the next EU Ambassador lecture. Have a good day. Thank you, Ambassador Denis.
Thank you.